Welcome Biology 202. Today we're going to be talking about the lymphatic system. So this is just a overview of the lymphatic system here that we have. What we're going to be looking at today is we're going to be looking at what we call lymphoid cells, tissues, and organs. So we think about tonsils, the thymus, the spleen, the Peyer's patches, and the appendix. They're going to play a large role in our immune system. And then we're also going to be looking at lymphatic vessels and lymph nodes. All of this is going to be in our discussion of the lymphatic system. So this is a little breakdown I got from the textbook on how to think of the lymphatic system. So the lymphatic system itself is going to be composed of lymph nodes and lymphatic vessels. And then we also have what we call lymphoid cells, tissues, and organs, which is going to include the lymph nodes. So that's actually where we're going to see these organs and lymphatic system overlap. So we're going to be looking at these two systems in this PowerPoint, and they are functionally distinct. However, they are structurally overlapping, is how we can think of them. So that's going to be the lymphatic system on one side and the lymphoid organs and tissues on the other side. And the overlapping there is going to be with the lymph nodes. So when we look at the functions of these, basically, the lymphatic system, it's going to return fluid to the blood vessels. So any leaked fluid from the blood vessels in the vascular system, they need to get back to the blood. We don't want to lose or waste all that fluid. So it's going to be really passively moving through the lymphatic vessels to get back really towards the heart is where the flow is going to be. So there's going to be three major parts: lymphatic vessels, the lymph, which is the fluid that is in the lymphatic vessels. The lymph is to lymphatic vessels as the blood is to blood vessels. You could think of it that way. It's also going to have lymph nodes, and those are going to actually cleanse the lymph. They're like tiny kidneys, and they even look like kidneys, really, when you look at a cross-section of them. So fluid is going to pass through those lymph nodes, and that's going to filter the lymph. When we look at the other side of this Venn diagram, I guess you could think of it as, you have the lymphoid organs and tissues. They're going to be the structural framework for the immune system. So where we're able to actually target disease and destroy those pathogens and those foreign particles in our body. So a good example of that is the spleen. If you look at the spleen, it looks like a filter, and it's going to catch even our own cells that need to be degraded, like red blood cells, and also viruses and bacteria and things like that. The thymus, your tonsils when you're eating food, pathogens, viruses, bacteria will actually get caught in your tonsils. That's why people get inflamed tonsils and swollen tonsils a lot. So that's the overlap we have between the lymphoid cells, tissues, and organs, and the lymphatic system. So the overlap there is in the middle with the lymph nodes, because that's really a part of the lymphoid cells, but it's also a part of the lymphatic system itself. So for the lymphatic vessels, for the components of the lymphatic system, the lymphatic vessels, they're going to follow really the same pathway as all the arteries and veins, because again, their purpose is to catch excess fluid. Your vascular system is very pressurized. Well, that pressure pushes fluids and even proteins and things outside of your blood. So the lymphatic vessels need to be nearby the veins and arteries so they can catch that extra fluid and then return it back to the heart. So that's going to be the lymphatic vessel side of this. The lymphoid organs and tissues, they're going to house the lymphatic cells and the blood cells, which are going to be used for our immune defenses. And they're all throughout the body. So we're going to see lymph nodes, the spleen, thymus, tonsils, Peyer's patches, which will be in the intestines, and then the appendix as well. So here's just it's not a super detailed, just a cartoonerized version of this to simplify it. You see your arterial system and your venous system. So your arteries and veins carrying blood away from your heart and then bringing it back to your heart. And then the point of contact there would be your capillaries, where you actually have the diffusion of gases and nutrients and everything like that in your tissues. And you'll notice wrapped around that you have tons of lymphatic capillaries. So just like you have blood capillaries, you have lymphatic capillaries. So the lymphatic capillaries are going to surround the blood capillaries. When that fluid leaks from the highly pressurized blood capillaries, it can be absorbed by the lymphatic system. And we're going to look at here shortly at how those fluids are actually received. But you can just think of the lymphatic system as really an open, low pressure system. The cardiovascular system is a closed, high pressure system. So they really complement each other in that regards. So about 3 liters of fluid leaks into the interstitial fluid every day. So you have 3 liters of extra fluid that we have to figure out what to do with. It's not good for it to just stick around cells when it's not needed. So it needs to be returned to the blood. So the blood volume itself would actually not be high enough if you could not return those fluids back to your blood. So people would actually have extremely low blood pressure if you were not able to properly move lymph back to towards your heart to get back into the cardiovascular system. So the lymphatic system is going to serve that vital purpose of regulating your blood volume, which is really going to regulate your blood pressure. You can think of it, really, I put this image here of a fountain to kind of imagine the difference between cardiovascular and lymphatic, of what they actually do. So if you look at a fountain, what you have is you have the water's coming in at a high pressure, right? It's spraying the water. And in this scenario, the water is trying to be sprayed from the fountain into the center basin so it can be drained back into the system and then be sprayed again. Well, not all the water is going to stay in the high pressure part of the fountain. Some of it will come in, but then a little bit of it is going to get sprayed out to the side. So you can think of the water that's spraying as your blood pressure, cardiovascular system. All the water that drips off to the side needs to be collected so it's not wasted. That's your lymphatic system. So your lymphatic system is the drainage return for the fountain. So any water that sprays off to the side has to be pulled back in so it can be used again, and that's exactly what your lymphatic system does. So it's extremely efficient. It creates a way to not waste 3 liters of fluid every day, which would be very difficult to recoup. So very good purpose. So if you just look at the lymphatic system, this is what it looks like wrapped around or wrapped throughout the body. And what's important about it is because its purpose is to get the fluid back to the heart, there is only a one direction of flow in your lymphatic system. It is all moving from your extremities coming back to the heart. It's not like your cardiovascular system where you have the arteries pushing the blood towards those extremities and then your veins are returning that blood back to the heart. No, for your lymphatic system, it's just one direction. It's going from the ends back to the core. So there's actually things that people do to keep their lymph flowing. And one of those methods to keep your lymph flowing to help with like lymphedema and things like that is actually a massage where they pressure from the extremities back to the core, and it keeps that lymph flowing back towards the heart. So if we zoom in a little bit closer, this is what it looks like with those lymphatic vessels wrapped throughout the blood capillaries. So you see it looks like a spider web. It's all just intertwined. And so what that does is it allows the lymphatic vessels to be close, our lymphatic capillaries to be close to the blood capillaries so that any fluid that is leaked is able to be returned. And if we zoom in even closer, right to the end of a lymphatic capillary, this is what it looks like. Basically, it looks like a bunch of flaps. The way they describe these is they say they are blind-ended tubes. So the tubes have a dead end, basically. They're like little fingers hanging around the capillaries. They're actually made of endothelial cells, and they overlap each other. So what that does is it creates many valves that open and close depending on the conditions. So you can see those little filaments here. That's actually what anchors them to the connective tissue. They're made of collagen. and that helps hold them in place. Now, if the fluid volume increases, what that's going to do is it pulls open the flaps. So if the pressure gets high, if there's a lot of fluid coming off of the blood, then that's actually going to open up the lymphatic capillaries, which is going to pull fluid into the lymphatic vessels, which is good. You've got extra fluid, you need to get rid of it, so that's going to open up and absorb that fluid. So once the fluid is absorbed, the flaps will close. So what that does is, just like any kind of valve, it only lets fluids go through one way. So once the fluids come in, it closes, and the fluids cannot go back. If something blocks this, then the fluids can't come in, and you get lymphedema. Then you get the swelling, which, depending on how far that goes, it might even get to a point where it's irreversible. So serving a very good purpose. So while these capillaries really are everywhere in your body, there are some places where they are not. They're not going to be in your bones. They're not going to be intertwined in your bone marrow, and they're not in your teeth. So if we think about that, why would we not have lymphatic vessels in our bones, bone marrow, and teeth? Well, if you think about those structures, what do they all have in common? They're all very hard. So in your bones, for example, your lymphatic vessels aren't needed because the bones are so hard that the fluids don't actually escape from those tissues. So, like, for example, when your red blood cells are produced, those fluids are leaving the bones, and they flow right into the bloodstream. It's perfectly efficient. So, and it's the same situation with your teeth, that you don't actually need lymphatic vessels in those areas. But everywhere else, you're going to have these vessels. So other than just the fluids, because we talked about the 3 liters of fluid, there's actually a lot of other substances that your lymphatic capillaries need to pick up. When fluid comes out of your cardiovascular system, you're also going to have proteins, and they're going to build up in that interstitial space, and they can't go back into the blood capillaries. It's just too pressurized. They're not going to flow back in there, so they're going to come into the lymphatic capillaries. So if there's inflammation, these lymphatic capillaries will develop openings, and that can take in even larger particles, so they adapt to what they need to bring in. Lots of times they're going to be bringing in, and this is one of their primary purposes, to capture bacteria and viruses. Even cancer cells, rogue cancer cells, can be brought into lymphatic capillaries. And once they get in there, it's a one-directional flow back to the heart, and they're going to go through a lot of lymph nodes, and that's going to be an opportunity to destroy those pathogens. So when they do these lymphatic massages and things like that, it's actually really good for your immune system to kill cancer cells and different pathogens that are in your body. There's also, just to mention this, there is a special type of lymphatic capillary that is in your notes called a lacteal. And what they do is they take fats just from the small intestines, and they bring those fats back to the blood. And for these, since fats are white, if you think about fats and oils, they usually have a white appearance. They get this name, these lacteal lymphatic capillaries, because lact means milk. You think of lactose. So this is a special type of fatty lymph fluid. So again, this is what that general system looks like. So the flow of lymph would do this. It would go into the interstitial fluid from the blood. Fluid builds up, really pressurized, it leaks out. Then it moves into the lymphatic capillaries. From the lymphatic capillaries, it's going to go to the collecting lymphatic vessels, then to the lymphatic trunks, and then finally it's going to end up into the lymphatic ducts, which is where it's draining back into the blood. So it has this process of going from really smaller vessels to larger vessels. And you'll notice highlighted here in the diagram that's in your notes in your textbook is these little valves. And those valves, just like valves in your heart, like the mitral valve, what they do is they let blood go through, but then the blood can't go back. And this is the same situation. The lymph goes through, but it can't go back. So one directional flow. So this is a outline diagram from your textbook as well. And what we see here is that the largest collecting vessels eventually unite to form what we call those lymphatic trunks. So the lymph drains from those paired lumbar, bronchomediastinal, subclavian, and jugular trunks, and the single intestinal trunk. So all of that lymph eventually is going to go into and drain into these two major ducts. And the two large ducts are going to be the right lymphatic duct and the thoracic duct. So that's what we see here highlighted in these red circles. So it's all coming in here and over here, which is very close to the superior vena cava, which is where it goes right into the heart, the right atrium of the heart. So the cisterna chyli gets its name. You see that there from Latin and Greek. And a lot of these are going to have Latin and Greek roots, which is why they have kind of weird names to them. So here's another overall diagram here. Now we can see the lymphatic system wrapped around the cardiovascular system for basically the whole body here. So for this diagram, everything in green, so all this green highlighted here in the upper right quadrant of the person's body, all of that lymph, again, that's moving in one direction, that's going to drain into the right subclavian vein. Everything that's skin color, kind of more orange or yellow here, that's going to be drained by the thoracic duct into the left subclavian vein. So you'll see them both coming in sort of in this symmetric way on both sides of the body. So just kind of looking at that flow a little bit more detail, each subclavian vein, the left and the right, will join with its corresponding internal jugular vein to form a brachiocephalic vein. From there, the right subclavian vein and the right internal jugular vein will go to the right brachiocephalic vein. The left subclavian vein and the left internal jugular vein will go to the left brachiocephalic vein. So you see them both converging at that point of intersection. And eventually it comes to the superior vena cava. So when you think about the flow of this lymph, what keeps it flowing? Well, with our blood, of course, you have the heart. And not only do you have your heart pumping the blood, you even have muscle tissue in your arteries and veins that, similar to your intestines, contracts autonomically to help move your blood through your body. Well, for your lymph, you don't have an active pump. So what actually keeps your lymph moving is yourself. So when you flex your muscles, for example, when you go for a walk and your skeletal muscles contract, that actually squeezes the lymphatic vessels and pushes the lymph through the lymph nodes and the lymphatic vessels and capillaries. So if you are not moving ever, you're not getting your lymph to flow properly. And you could actually end up with swelling in parts of your body due to inactivity, and which is also going to be really bad for your immune system, because keeping lymph flowing properly helps you catch bacteria and viruses. So if you remember when COVID first happened and they were saying one of the best things you could do was go for a walk every day. And that's because you're getting those viral particles trapped in your lymph nodes by keeping the lymph moving, and you're able to catch it and destroy it. So one of the worst things for elderly people, people with a compromised immune system or anything like that, is inactivity, because the lymph doesn't flow. You'll have pressure changes in the thorax and your valves as well. They're going to help keep it moving. But one of the best things you can do is just be active. Go for a walk every day. Other things that people will do is they'll get massages. A massage is basically doing the same thing as being active. It's pushing that lymph back towards your heart. Something that people do as well that's become popular lately is what's called rebounding, which is basically you get on a trampoline and you jump for 5 minutes a day. When you jump on a trampoline, obviously you're using your muscles, and you're also forcing fluids to flow through your body. The fluids can't go back in the lymphatic system, so every time you jump up, it pushes the blood through the valves at a pretty high pressure, and then when you come back down, it resets, and it really gets lymph flowing. What they call dry brushing, where you take a brush and rub it on your skin, which is similar to like a massage. It pushes the fluid through. Staying hydrated and doing breathing exercises will keep that lymph moving. I know for the nursing program, this is a list of lymph nodes that they have to be able to find by touch and to describe whether it's a normal or abnormal lymph node. And this is just a list. I'm not going to go through this in this PowerPoint, but I did post a link to a simulation where you can actually move around a person's body to find all of these lymph nodes that are in that nursing program checklist, if you're interested in that, if you're in the nursing program. So here are some just lymph nodes of the face. And if you look at their names, submental, right? It's at the base of the mental area, the chin area. Submandibular, it's under the mandible. Occipital, near the occipital lobe. So a lot of these names, preauricular, right, before the ear, postauricular, past the ear or behind the ear. If you're guessing what is the name of one, think about the body regional term, and then you'll probably be able to guess the right answer, especially if it's a multiple choice question. So a lot of them, not really hard to memorize. You've already learned the body regional terms. You're probably going to be able to guess what all of those are. So again, this just zooms into where those drainage ducts are. So if you look, it comes in right between the right subclavian vein on the right side here and the internal jugular vein. So then that's right where you have that right lymphatic duct coming in, and you see how close it is to the superior vena cava. And then on the left side, we see something very similar, internal jugular vein, left subclavian vein, and that's where you have that thoracic duct right in there into that convergence point, and then it's coming into the superior vena cava. Then we need to talk about, so we talked about lymphatic vessels. Now we want to talk about some lymphoid cells. There's an analogy I like to use with these. At Walmarts, I don't know if you guys have noticed, but right when you walk in to a Walmart, there's a door on the side. So there's like the first double doors, and then there's a locked door on the side, and then there's the next double doors, and they have all the grocery carts in between. Well, in the doors on the side, that's a point where they have security guards watching cameras. They're also really close to the detectors there when someone leaves. If someone took, a laptop and it still has that device on it, it'll make the alarms go off. And what they do is they come out of that door and then they chase down the person and they tackle them. I actually saw somebody with bags and bags of groceries coming out of there, and two men ran out of that door when I was coming in and grabbed somebody and then took them to the side and were talking to them. And this is kind of what we see with our lymphoid cells. Our lymphoid cells are going to help manage identifying and destroying, filtering and trapping bacteria and viruses. So they recognize something's off and they're going to come out and take care of business. So our lymphoid cells are going to be our immune system cells. That's going to be in the lymphoid tissues, plus the cells that form the scaffolding of these tissues. So some cells we're going to look at: lymphocytes. We have T cells and B cells. If you remember T cells, they are able to directly attack and destroy infected cells. They have to be activated to do that. And then your B cells are going to be producing those antibodies. The antibodies help target those particles for destruction. We have macrophages. They're going to be able to literally eat these foreign substances. They can also help activate T cells so they can go and destroy these foreign substances. You'll have dendritic cells. They help capture antigens and they bring them to lymph nodes. So dendritic cells are like the police officers, fulfilling a warrant. They go out and capture them, but they're not going to be the ones doing the actual, procedures in the courtroom. They're just capturing the thing and bringing it to where it needs to go. Then you have reticular cells. These are going to produce reticular fiber stroma, which is a network that supports these other organs and tissues. So what that reticular tissue looks like is this. So this is an image of reticular tissue. Most of your lymphoid tissues look like this. They're made up of this reticular tissue. The thymus is different, which we'll look at. But you can see in this image some interesting things. You'll see macrophages dispersed throughout. They literally live on these fibers. There's also a lot of lymphocytes that you can see here in this image. And they're actually moving through this tissue very quickly. The lymphocytes, they'll come to this tissue and then they will actually go back into the blood. They patrol the blood looking for antigens, and then they actually, if they catch anything, they bring it back here, and it gets caught so that those particles can be eaten by the macrophages. So what benefits the system is a constant flow of fluid, so that these, basically like police officers, they patrol the body through the lymph, find the bad guys, find the bacteria and the viruses, bring it back basically to the police station where they can be prosecuted, or in this case, the macrophages eat the bacteria. So constant flow is what's going to be good for fighting infections and preventing, sepsis and things like that. So we have two groups for the lymphoid organs. You have your primary lymphoid organs. That's going to be where your B cells, your T cells are going to mature. The B cells mature in the bone marrow. That's why they're called that. And then the T cells mature, T for thymus is where they're going to mature. So that's our primary lymphoid organs. Our secondary lymphoid organs are going to be where mature lymphocytes are first going to encounter their antigens, where they become activated. So not where they mature, but where they activate is in the secondary lymphoid organs. So that's going to include your lymph nodes, the spleen, the collections of mucosa-associated lymphoid tissue, or what they call MALT, and that's going to be what forms your tonsils, Peyer's patches in the intestines, or the small intestine, and in your appendix. And those structures are highlighted here for you. This is what a lymph node looks like. I have a model of this that I'm ordering soon, but I don't have it in yet. But you'll notice, for those of you who have already done a kidney dissection before, you'll notice it looks a lot like a kidney. It actually functions very similarly as well, right? A kidney filters waste, toxins, excess fluid, and your lymph nodes are actually going to filter bacteria, viruses, and cancer cells. So it's the lymph node is a bunch of tiny kidneys of the lymphatic system. So the lymph nodes support the immune response. They're going to have white blood cells. We call those lymphocytes. Again, mainly that's going to be B cells and T cells, as well as the macrophages and dendritic cells that we mentioned. They're all going to be used to detect the pathogens, to capture them, and to destroy them. They're also going to facilitate antigen presentation. That's going to be bringing foreign particles to the lymph nodes, where they present them literally to lymphocytes, and that's going to help trigger an immune response to them. So this is the overall just kind of cartoonerized diagram. You see it all kind of filters towards the middle. Also have a hilum, just like a kidney. And this is what it looks like up close, a real image of a slide of a lymph node. So the structures we see highlighted here, you see follicles. So those contain very dense clusters of B lymphocytes. So right off the bat in these follicles, the lymph node is able to recognize the antigens and start producing antibodies. You do want to do that very quickly so that you can start targeting them for destruction. See trabecula or trabeculae, plural. These are extensions of the capsule, and they provide that structural support that actually guides the lymph through the node. So it's the pathways that are able to be created here. You'll see the subcapsular sinus. It's going to be the first place where the incoming lymph actually enters, which is going to allow those macrophages to start handling business. Then you have a capsule. It's actually the covering that covers the lymph nodes for protection and filtration. The medullary cords, medullary sinuses. The cords are the strands of lymphatic tissue that contain plasma cells and macrophages. So they help remove the pathogens and they make antibodies. And then the medullary sinuses, they're open channels. So that's where lymph can flow more slowly so the macrophages can destroy it. That brings us to the spleen. So this is what the spleen looks like. The spleen is a filter, has that reticular tissue in it. It actually removes blood-borne pathogens because it filters your blood. So bacteria and viruses in your blood are going to come through the spleen. It also takes old red blood cells that have become misshapen are going to end up going through the spleen. So pathogens and old red blood cells are going to be caught, and then they'll they'll be able to be digested. And the way it works is when red blood cells start moving through the spleen, it has these little capture points where if the red blood cell is not the ideal shape, it won't be able to fit through, in which case it gets stuck and then it will be destroyed, which is really good. You want to filter your blood because if you're using a bunch of old, faulty red blood cells, they're not going to be moving oxygen to your body very well and getting CO2 out, so they're not going to be doing their job. So when they get old, your spleen is going to take care of getting rid of those. This is what a spleen looks like on a microscope slide. So you can see that grainy texture to it and all of that reticular tissue. So some other structures, we're going to have the tonsils. Like, what is the point of tonsils? Right, people get rid of their tonsils because they get swollen and infected all the time. Well, what they literally do is they take pathogens from your food and from the air. So when you're breathing in the air, there's little tiny bacteria, maybe even fungal particles and things flying around, and your tonsils will capture them, pulls them in, which is great. They serve a very good purpose because it's training your immune system for all these things that you encounter every day. Now, obviously, you don't want them to be fully encapsulated because they need to bring things in. So the epithelium of the tonsils invaginates. It has these grooves into them, into the interior, so it can move things in. So the grooves that go in, they go eventually into a dead end. So basically, you've been lost before and then you come to a dead end and then you're stuck. You got to figure out what to do. Because this flow is one direction, once the bacteria get to a dead end, they can't get out. So they call these a tonsillar crypt because literally it's their tomb. It guides them into their tomb, basically. So once the bacteria get in there, that can be destroyed, and then memory is developed against those pathogens. So your tonsils serve a purpose, a very good purpose. Now, sometimes people, they get infected all the time, and it's very uncomfortable. It creates swelling, a lot of pain. People will remove their tonsils. When that happens, what they've noticed in patients is in the short term, their immune system function will actually decrease because their tonsils have been providing a large component of producing antibodies. So their blood concentration of antibodies will actually dip, but the other lymphoid tissues, not too long after they have been removed, will start to up their production of antibodies to compensate. So what ends up happening is you do have decreased immune function in the short term, but in the long term, the other organs will actually pick up the slack, and you won't have long-term decreased immune function. At least as far as I've read, I have not seen a correlation between tonsils removal and long-term decreased immune function, which is good. That brings us to the thymus. You'll notice the thymus has two lobes here in this top left cross section. This is what the tissue looks like if you were to take a cross section of it, sort of a transverse plane there, and just look at what the tissue looks like. This is actually much more important in the early years of one's life. In a newborn baby, for example, the thymus is much larger and much more active. After puberty, the thymus actually will decrease in size slowly, and it eventually almost becomes completely replaced by just fibrous and fatty tissue. It still continues to produce mature T cells when you get older, but at a much, much lower rate than it does when you are a child and adolescence. So in the thymus, what happens is T lymphocytes, right, T cells, thymus cells, these precursors mature here to become mature lymphocytes. So in the thymus is where they become able to actually do what they are supposed to do. So in a child, that's much more important because their immune system is still developing. So their thymus is much larger. You'll notice it looks about the size of one of their lungs. And then by the time you're an adult, it looks, the size of a $50, and it's not really doing much. So, in a child, immune system's developing, can be very important. The next structure we'll look at is going to be the Peyer's patches. I think it may have glitched out on me. I don't know if it's showing you the image here, but Payer's patches are going to be for the intestines, and in that point, pathogens in your food that's moving through are able to be captured, and you can produce immunoglobulins from that. And then, of course, your appendix as well is going to be one of these structures, and that's actually an offshoot of the large intestines. I don't think it's showing you. I think the recording is messed up, but it's part of an offshoot of the large intestines, and it contains a high concentration of lymphoid follicles. So like the Payer's patches, the appendix is in a good place to prevent bacteria from going through the intestinal walls. So it's a great place to capture bacteria. If you get appendicitis, you have inflammation of the appendix, in which case it can be removed. Similar to the tonsils, right? It's providing an immune function. In the short term, you might have a decreased immune function, but your other lymphoid organs and cells are going to pick up the slack after they've been removed. All right, that's it for the lymphatic system.